I started working at a local pizza place in my town, a suburb outside a big city, when I was 16. At first, they had me helping out in the kitchen, prepping, cleaning and doing odd jobs. After a couple of months, my boss told me I'd be filling in as a delivery driver whenever the regular delivery guy was off. Naturally, I said yes. Then, one day the delivery guy came back from a run, looking like he'd seen a ghost. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling. He disappeared into my boss's office and they argued for about 15 minutes. When he finally came out, he muttered, "I'm done," and patted me on the back before walking out. I asked him why he was leaving and he just said, "It's a shitty job, that's all." I could tell it was more than that, but I didn't press him. That was the last time I saw him. For the next couple of weeks, I filled in as the delivery driver until they could find a replacement. Everything was normal until one evening, when my boss gave me an address on the far side of town. I punched the address into my GPS and headed out just as the sun was setting. The drive took me to the rural edge of town, where houses were spaced far apart. When I pulled up, the place gave me an eerie feeling. It was a 2-story house, old and run down, with dead trees and weeds growing wild around it. There was nothing on the porch. No chairs, no flowers, no decorations. It looked abandoned. Still, I got out of the car, holding the pizza, and knocked on the door. For a moment, I hoped there'd been a mistake, that my boss had given me the wrong address. But then, I heard the door lock rattle, and the door slowly opened. A frail, elderly woman, she must have been at least 70, stood there. Her white hair was thin, and she had missing teeth. But what really unsettled me were her eyes. They were staring straight through me with this intense, almost angry glare. Trying to keep things light, I held up the pizza and said, "Pepperoni pizza?" "Yes," she rasped, her voice sounding hoarse, as though she had a sore throat. "Alrighty, here you go." I handed the pizza over, but she just stood there, staring at it, not making a move to take it. Then, as she dug into her purse, she looked up at me and asked, "Did you come with someone else?" I froze. The question chilled me to the bone. "No, I came alone," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We saw the other one," she said, almost whispering. "He ran off the last time he came." She continued digging in her purse, and it seemed like forever. Her hand was down in the bottom of the bag, not pulling out cash but gripping something I couldn't see. I felt a rising panic, wondering what she could be holding. A weapon, maybe. Then, from behind her, I saw the shadow of a man moving toward the door. At the same time, I heard footsteps crunching on leaves to my left, just outside the porch. I turned to see a man in his middle ages, glaring at me, his face twisted in anger. He stepped onto the porch and began to climb toward me. That was it. I was done. I threw the pizza back into the car, started the engine, and sped off into the night without looking back. I had to lie to my boss and pay for the pizza out of pocket, but it was worth it. A few days after I quit, I finally told my boss what had happened. He looked genuinely freaked out and told me I should have informed him sooner. He mentioned that the former delivery guy, James, had once told him that he'd walked out on an order at a weird house, but my boss hadn't thought much of it at the time. He ended up calling the police. A couple of days later, he got back to me with an update. Apparently, the house was registered as foreclosed for over a year, but when the police went to check it out, they found 3 people living inside, 2 men and the old woman. They were arrested, but I don't know the details beyond that. I still get chills thinking about that night, and wonder what would have happened if I had stayed any longer. Maybe they would have attacked me. All I know is, I'm grateful I got out of there and left that job. I'll never forget that one night when I covered a shift for my friend at the pizzeria. Normally, I was the guy behind the counter, manning the register, but that night, I was filling in as the delivery driver. The first 2 deliveries went smoothly enough, just regular customers in familiar neighborhoods. Then, towards the end of my shift, my manager handed me one last order. It was a bit of a drive, about 5 miles away, farther than I was used to delivering. The GPS led me off the highway and into a quiet, out-of-the-way town I didn't even know existed. As I drove deeper into it, the roads grew darker and emptier. Half the streetlights were either broken or flickering. I didn't like the look of the place. I just wanted to deliver the pizza and get out of there as fast as possible. When I finally pulled up to the address, I saw a small single-story house. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. The door opened almost instantly, and an older man, probably in his late 50s with sparse, greying hair and a thin moustache, greeted me. He gave me a strange smile and said he'd be right back with the money. I stood there in the cold, watching as he disappeared into the back of the house, leaving me awkwardly waiting by the open door. The guy's whole vibe was unsettling, and the neighborhood wasn't helping either. I heard the creaky floorboards as he moved around, inside. Then he came back to the door, flashing that same odd smile. He offered to let me come inside to warm up while I waited. I told him it was fine, but he insisted, giving me a little nudge to step in. I'm not sure why I agreed. It was freezing outside, and maybe I figured a few minutes indoors wouldn't hurt. So, against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, and as I took in my surroundings, I realized it was barely warmer inside. The house felt eerie and neglected, and I found myself inching back toward the door. Then, the man returned and motioned to a door leading down to the basement, explaining that he usually kept his cash down there. He asked if I'd come down with him to help him find it. I hesitated, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a creaking step coming from the darkness below. Someone else was down in that basement. That was all I needed to know. I spun around, ready to leave, but the man was already blocking my way. Panic kicked in, and I reacted on instinct. I punched him in the face, just enough to stun him, and as he staggered back, I managed to push past him and bolt for the door. I didn't look back as I sprinted to my car, threw myself inside, and peeled out of that driveway as fast as I could. When I got back, I told my manager everything. He immediately called the cops, but I never found out what became of that place, or the man inside. My manager gave me a few days off to recover, and since then I've learned a valuable lesson. Never, under any circumstances, go inside a stranger's house. One late night, I was out on a delivery run, a long drive, even by my usual standards. It was a solid 20-minute trip from the pizza place where I worked, but since the order was for 4 large pizzas, I figured it was a party. I thought, big order, big tip. Navigating those dirt roads at night was unsettling. When I finally reached the address, I found an old, run-down building right in the middle of a clearing in the forest. No cars were parked outside, no lights were on, everything about it seemed wrong. I called my boss, double-checking the address at least 3 times, hoping I'd typed it in wrong. But no, it was the right place. My boss, in an irritated mood, told me to knock on the door and check things out, reminding me that he wouldn't be pleased if I came back with 4 untouched pizzas. I was beyond uneasy, but I forced myself to get out of the car and approach the building. There was no doorbell, so I knocked hard. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, calling out, "Pizza delivery!" Just as I was about to turn away, I heard faint rustling sounds inside. I knocked one last time out of desperation, and that's when I noticed something at the window. A pair of eyes was staring right at me. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, but those wide, unblinking eyes bored into me from the darkness. My blood turned to ice. I dropped the pizzas right there, sprinted back to my car, and jumped in. But when I turned the key, the engine sputtered. It took 3 tries before it finally roared to life. I backed up off the grass and sped down the dirt road. But something was wrong. The car was shaking, bumping as though it was hitting rocks. The further I drove, the more resistance I felt, until I heard a horrible scraping noise. My car slowed to a halt. I got out to check, and what I saw made my heart stop. All 4 of my tires had been slashed, the rubber shredded completely off the rims. Someone had done this while I was knocking on that door. I could barely breathe. Instead of running, I locked myself in the car and dialed 911, whispering my situation to the operator. She told me to stay put and keep the doors locked, and to stay on the line until help arrived. I sat there in pitch-black silence, surrounded by the dense, shadowy forest. As I scanned the windows, trying to calm my racing heart, my eyes fell on the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw her. It was the same face I'd seen in the window, but now, in the dim light, I could see more clearly. It was a woman, her eyes wide and haunting, a twisted smile just beginning to spread across her face. She was in the back seat. I bolted from the car, sprinting into the woods, branches scraping at me as I ran, making no effort to be quiet. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, finally collapsing behind a large fallen log. I tried to steady my breathing, covering my mouth with my hand to muffle the sound, praying she wouldn't follow. I waited there, crouched and trembling, for what felt like an eternity, until finally the distant wail of sirens pierced the silence. Gathering every bit of strength I had left, I ran back toward the road, relief washing over me when I saw the flashing red and blue lights. The officers were inspecting my car, and I stumbled out of the woods, screaming for help. They quickly surrounded me, calming me down enough to explain what had happened. One of the patrol cars drove back to the building, while the other officers searched the area around my car. They found nothing in the building except for some twisted, sharp objects that they figured had been used to slash my tires. They guessed that the house might have been occupied by a deranged couple, maybe involved in some twisted game. They never caught anyone, though, and I left that job right after the incident. Now I work at a local grocery store, far from any dirt roads or creepy houses in the woods. But no matter what I do, I'll never forget seeing that woman's face in my rearview mirror, her cold eyes staring right through me.